Yes, defending this movie is a hill that I am personally willing to die on. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Slasher Talk Podcast. I am currently, if you're listening to this, it is Friday at some point. If you're not listening to it on Friday, A, rude. But B, I hope you've had a great week. Whatever day you're listening to this, just thank you for listening, first off. But I am currently, well, it should be at least if everything goes according to plan. I am currently in Austin, Texas at South by Southwest enjoying a bunch of premieres and different movies. It is Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. So I'm talking to you from the past. How's the future? Is everything okay yet? Because, yeah. Anyway, with it being Friday, tonight I get to see Ready or Not 2, and I hope I'm in, like, the same room as Samara Weaving. I've heard more of, I've seen more things that she actually might be attending. So I don't know that there will be a podcast episode next week, because if I get to speak to Samara Weaving, if I get to meet Samara Weaving, I might pass out and die. That's not an exaggeration. So, if there's no podcast episode next week, if you do not hear from me at all past what you're listening to right now, just assume I got to meet Samara Weaving and I immediately passed away. So, hopefully, future Justin is having a great time and he's ready for Ready or Not 2. Last night, before we get into me defending Tusk, which I will forever continue to do, last night I got to check out Undertone at a Dolby Theater, AMC Dolby Theater. I watched this, and this is the second time that I watched this film. It's currently out now. It's now officially out because it's Friday, so I can finally, no spoilers, but I want to talk about Undertone because I've already seen it's, even after some of the early reviews that came out from the screenings last night, I'm seeing this being not necessarily like divisive, but I'm seeing very polarizing reviews come out from a bunch of content creator friends and some people I talked to last night and things. I loved this fucking movie. I loved it. 5 out of 5. Will I say that it's, like, technically a perfect, I think that there is, like, a section that maybe kinda, like, could be reworked or maybe, like, removed or whatever, but, like, walking out of the movie, for me, how I personally rate things, this was a 5 out of 5. This is my kind of film. But I'm seeing some, like, very low ratings, like, people hate this movie. 1 star, I heard, worst A24 film ever produced, and I don't agree with those, and I don't understand, um, how you could have that opinion walking out, because objectively, it's a very well-made film, but it's just one that the concept and everything I personally fuck with. But I found one thing very interesting last night. First and foremost, if you can go see this in a Dolby theater, you definitely should. I've never been to a Dolby theater before, so seeing an audio-driven horror as my first one, loved that experience. There were a couple of scenes, because like I said, I had already seen the film months and months and months ago through Fantasia Film Festival. And I'll get into that in a second. But seeing it in a theater setting in Dolby, the Dolby sound really amplified a couple of these scenes. Like, I could feel the heartbeats and like the bass in my seat when, like, things are happening throughout the house. I could hear them to my right and behind me and left, and the sound was literally moving in the room. It just adds so much to the experience. So if you can see this in a Dolby theater, 100% take that opportunity. But what I will say is this, although I very much loved that experience, and I do think the Dolby helped amplify some of these scenes, this is such an interesting and unique film in the way of I will always champion seeing films in a theater. So do not twist my words. But what's unique about Undertone and my first experience watching this film, I saw it at home because I was working on this festival through um I was covering this festival remotely, and I got sent the screener for Undertone, and I watched it at home late at night, pitch black darkness in this office with headphones in. And it was such a different experience. A, it's the first time that I had watched it. So, like, you can't ever recreate the first time that you watch something like this specifically. But watching it at home in the comfort of your own home, this film has the way of I experienced the movie like Evie experiences the audio clips in the movie itself. There are several scenes in this film where she's listening to the clips and she's like looking in her living room because she feels like she hears something, not in the headphones, but she feels like she hears something inside of her house. That is the experience that I had watching it at home for the first time. And that it was such an immersive experience where I'm in the complete darkness of my own home, in my room, and all these things are happening, and I'm looking behind me. I'm looking down my hallway, and I had to, like, pause the movie several times and go, "Is there somebody in my house?" Which is just such a unique experience, and then, again, I don't wanna go dive into a bunch of spoilers, but the sense that as the movie goes, I felt like the entire time that there was an evil presence in my room lurking in the shadows and watching me watch this film. And I haven't had an experience with a movie like that in I can't even remember the last time, to be honest. So, what I will say is I would highly recommend supporting this movie in a theater, as you always should. But I will also recommend, especially if the movie doesn't quite hit for you in a theater, because you're in a theater, when you're in a theater environment. I had the guy next to me. He was quiet the entire time, didn't make a sound, but he was eating popcorn. And a couple of people got up to like go to the bathroom a couple times. It just kind of like takes you out of the immersive experience. So I would highly recommend when this thing hits physical media or rent on video on demand or whatever, to give this movie a shot watching it at home in the complete darkness with headphones on. And I think and maybe you can have that more of a immersive experience that I had. Um, Even if you like this film, do that when this hits because I think it's man, I don't know. I just hopefully you go see this film. Hopefully it hits for you the way that it hit for me. Like I said, I know some people that just did not like it whatsoever, and that's fine. Like, not everybody's going to like the same things. I personally fucking loved it, and I don't foresee realistically this thing leaving my top 5, if not top 3 for the year. I've got Undertone and Obsession, I think, locked into my top 3. So, but if you saw Undertone last night on Thursday's early screenings or last night's early screening at Dolby, or if you're listening to this over the weekend and you saw it, Friday night or whatever, please let me know what you thought of this film. I've been looking forward to this getting released to the public for so long. It's finally here. I cannot wait for Ian Tucson's version of Paranormal Activity. I think he was by far the correct choice to reinvigorate the Paranormal Activity franchise, and if you like paranormal stuff like that, you will love the Undertone, and I think you will just be over the fucking moon excited to see what he does with Paranormal Activity, because this man knows how to create tense and scary atmosphere. Okay, there's my rant about Undertone. I'm going to stop glazing it now and move on to the basis of this episode, which is in defense of Tusk. Now, I'm not going to lie. I posted if you follow me on social platforms, which I hope that you do, you saw me post a short form video about this yesterday in defense of Tusk. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't feel like the video got the attention that it deserved. I don't think people heard me. I don't know if the hook was wrong, or maybe people just don't give a fuck about Tusk. But that's fine. This is my podcast, and I'm going to give my thoughts on that movie just a little bit more attention, because this is a movie and a topic and a subject that I feel like people just do not give any sort of like serious contemplation to. They just don't take this movie seriously, which I get it. It's a black comedy body horror film. I get it. And the vehicle that which Kevin Smith used to tell the things that I'm going to get into here is a bit absurd. It's comedic. Some people just will not take it seriously, but I think that there is a lot that this movie has to say. With that said, let's dive into it. Plus, if you saw my short form video, I'm going to kind of dive into a little bit more here because I was trying to keep it pretty short. So anyway, Tusk is a movie that I will forever defend. I started really thinking about this years and years back when my best friend, whom I live with, Sean, he always just gives me shit. Always gives me shit about Tusk. And he's like, dude, I watched this movie. You always talk about this movie. I watched it. What the fuck? Like, I cannot take the end of this movie seriously. I was out when he starts doing his, thing up, he's in the zoo. Just like, I had to turn it off. And I'm just like, well, you saw the movie. That was the end. So I'm like, it's not the fact that you like didn't finish the movie. It's just at some point you're like, okay. But hearing that viewpoint really struck a chord with me, because it's the end of that movie that really wraps everything that the movie's trying to say up in a, albeit obscure, absurd way. Yes. But if you don't take the movie at face value, I think Kevin Smith has a lot to say about men's mental health, men's empathy, men's emotional intelligence, and how that affects their partners. He talks about relationships between like fathers and sons and like, just men in general. And I think Tusk, if you give it a chance and if you sit down and you really just, if you do not take it at face value, which I know it's hard, but if you really sit down and peel back the layers and see what is being said, this film is actually a hell of a lot deeper than people give it credit for. Now, I'm not saying it's some revolutionary, um, crazy high art, deep intellectual thing. No. But people just say it's just some dumb movie where a guy gets turned into a walrus. I promise you, there's more to this movie than meets the eye. At least how I watched the film. So in Tusk, our main character is Wallace, and he has this podcast that he runs with his best friend, Tommy. It's called the Not See Party. And it's the whole thing of like, um, Wallace goes on these like little trips and then he comes back and he tells Tommy about him. And, because, Tommy he doesn't get to see the things that Wallace or whatever, just something like that. But it's nice little play on obviously the Nazi party, which rolls into Yoga Hosier's, the quote unquote sequel to Tusk. Anyway, that's the basis here. And Wallace, this podcast for him over the years has gotten huge. And this comes into play because when something like that is successful, people tend to get a huge head, especially men. But before we dive into the relationship with Allie, there's a moment at the beginning of this film that I think really sets the tone for the underlying message or theme that Kevin Smith is trying to talk about within Tusk. Wallace is heading to Canada to interview this kid that went viral for this video, and he arrives to Canada and he's talking to like the border patrol, like customs officer within the airport. And he's having this conversation back and forth with him, and he makes this comment that he doesn't necessarily like hockey, and the guy gets like serious with him, and he's like, rule number one, you don't necessarily come into Canada and tell a Canadian that you don't fuck around with hockey. That's a no-no. That's what do you say? A Canada don't. Anyway, Wallace makes some comment about being sad or something. I don't necessarily remember the exact quote, but the customs patrol officer or whatever his title is makes a comment and says, well, the US created sadness. And Wallace was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, well, when you look at the flag, when you look at the US flag, it's red, white, and blue. He said, but when you stare at the majesty of the Canadian flag and you look past that maple leaf, what do you see? And Wallace is like, a white wall. And he's like, no. You see that Canada may be red and white, but we are never blue. Talking about sadness. It's like it's a play on, oh, I'm sad. Oh, you seem a bit blue today. I'm feeling blue. Depressed. Depressed, sad. So it was like a nice little back and forth to kind of set up this whole thing that we're gonna learn about Wallace as an individual, but I thought that was a nice little back and forth. And it's just it's another scene that really plays into what Kevin Smith presents us throughout the rest of the film. So then Wallace, he shows up, and this kid that he was supposed to interview killed himself. And this plays into Wallace's lack of empathy because he's not necessarily sad that the kid killed himself. He's so mad now and annoyed that the kid couldn't wait to kill himself until after the interview because he spent 500 some dollars to fly to Canada to interview this kid. And how selfish of this motherfucker to kill himself before I could interview him for my podcast because this was gonna do great views. So again, that kind of plays into another, like, layer of, like, how non-empathetic Wallace is. He's so mad that this kid committed suicide before he could interview him for his popular podcast. And he's like, well, I don't want to waste a trip to Canada. So he's in the bathroom and he's like, okay, and I need to figure out. And that's where he sees the flyer that's posted on the bathroom wall. You know, the letter says, you know, I'm a man that used to live at sea and I have all these wild adventures. And if you want some like unique, absurd stories, let's chat. So he sets up a meeting with this guy named Howard, and he's at his house, and that's when we learn this whole, to keep this short, Howard is this crazed guy that ends up turning Wallace into a walrus, right? That's the whole premise of Tusk, which is absurd for sure. But here is what, after we kind of meet Howard and they kind of have their back and forth, we get this flashback with Wallace and Allie. And, Allie's talking with Wallace and saying, I don't necessarily want you to go to Canada. This is before he, you know, made the trip. And he's like, well, I have to, you know, I have to interview this, you know, this kid. And she's just like, I don't like the way you are approaching this. You're already making fun of this kid on your podcast, but you're gonna fly up and basically use this kid and make fun of him to his face for clout for your podcast. You're gonna make money off of making fun of this kid. And he's like, well, it is what it is, man. Like, and she launches into this whole thing about how the Wallace that I fell in love with, the old Wallace, was just so, he had more empathy and he cared more, and he used to watch Winnie the Pooh and cry, and we would have these like deeper conversations. And the Wallace that I fell in love with, you know, cried and told me that he loved me the first time that we had sex, and was just going through this whole like, since this whole podcast, you've changed. You as a person, an individual, and as my boyfriend, you have changed. And I do not like it. And Wallace goes straight into defense mode, as men usually do. And he's like, well, old Wallace was a fucking loser. He didn't have a pan or a pot to piss in. He says, I had nothing. And then I built this podcast, and you know, he makes some comment about how he made $100,000 in quarter one. Like, obviously he's making a shit ton from this podcast financially. But I think this also plays into, you know, what we're going to be talking about with like men. There's this growing up, somehow, some way, it's always just like drilled into boys that as a boy, to be a successful man, you have to have a great job. You have to provide. You have to make a lot of money. Your status in society, your self-worth, and your reputation, your manlyhood is based on the things that you build and like the amount of money that you have. So Allie kind of, trying to approach Wallace in this, you used to just have more feeling and you used to have, you used to be more empathetic and you cared, and you're just kind of a fucking asshole. And he quickly just, defends himself and, well, I'm a lot better up. I have more things now. I have more money. I have this platform. I have more popularity. Therefore, my self-worth, I am worth so much than I used to be. How dare you say that I was actually better off before all of this? So that sets another basis of like Wallace's character. He used to be this completely different person, and through all this success, he's changed. He's got this big ego, and it's really starting to affect his relationship with Allie. So then before we dive into like the whole like Howard and Mr. Tusk and all that, we then learn more about Allie and Wallace's relationship. Allie, she has this like monologue and she's talking about how Wallace is just not treating her right. Wallace is cheating on her and makes her feel ugly and worthless. And she's so happy that her father is not around to see how much Wallace has affected Allie's self-worth and how she looks at herself and this, that, and the other, right? And that all comes from Wallace's, the things that we just talked about, his ego and his lack of empathy and his just emotional intelligence. That's bleeding into he's treating her like an object because all he wanted to do was just like, hey, like let's not have this conversation. I just like let's just fuck. Like I'm going to Canada. You can't stop me. We can talk when I'm in Canada, but what we can't do in Canada is fuck. So just shut up and take care of me. And we learn more about that through this monologue of Hallie and how the fact that Wallace is not even like being faithful with her. He's cheating and she knows that he's cheating. And the fact that she keeps coming back to him and trying to like, because she knows there's a man inside of him that she fell in love with. And there's a version of Wallace that she deeply cares for and loves. But she's sitting on the bed and she's like talking with somebody there and how like I feel terrible for what I have done to Wallace, cheating on Wallace with you. But like you make me feel worthy, you make me feel beautiful, you make me like I can't foresee a life without you. And turns out that's Tommy, Wallace's best friend and co-host. So this whole ego and like this whole new version of Wallace has bled into his relationship with Allie and has driven her away into the arms of Tommy, his best friend, his co-host, which as a person that has gone through being cheated on, I will never condone. Like, I don't think that there is a situation, even though Wallace is clearly a fucking asshole. I feel like there's always a different a different path. There's a different solution. If you're not happy in a relationship, have the tough conversation, or don't even have the tough conversation. Just leave. Just fucking leave. Do not cheat. It's one of the worst things that you can do to an individual. And what Allie's getting at in this conversation, because obviously I don't feel bad for Wallace in the slightest. He's a fucking piece of shit. But Allie feels bad for cheating on Wallace as well. And so cheating is never the answer. Just sort your shit and just fucking leave if you're not happy. Little fucking tangent on that. Anyway, so we've really set the basis of who Wallace used to be, who he is now, how that's affected his relationship, and now he finds himself with Howard in Canada. And Howard has drugged him, and he's like, hey, I am going to turn you into a walrus. And we have this intro, like the first time that we see Wallace as the walrus. Wallace the walrus, right? The first time that we see that, he comes in and Wallace is obviously screaming. He's in pain, he's freaking out. And so he's kind of showing a bit of emotion here. And Howard immediately checks him and says, no, do not. Walruses never cry, yells at him. Looks Wallace in the face and just yells, walruses never cry. I said that really fucking weird. I'm keeping it in. Cry. Walruses never cry. Now, it's such a quick scene. Such a quick little line. But this moment right here, this piece of dialogue to me is so heavy and so layered, because you can take that line literally. Okay? You can take it literally. But you can also take it in two very deep ways. You can take it as Howard is screaming at Wallace and saying, hey, you're a walrus now. Animals, which this will come back around into a later conversation that we find out Hallie has with Wallace. But he says, animals don't cry. You're a walrus now. That's just the way it is. But you could also look at it as Howard is a man in an older generation. And he's looking at Wallace as a man from a younger generation. So man to man, saying, listen, young one, take it from me, your elder, somebody smarter than you. I've been through more experiences. Men do not cry. Just on that alone is a conversation, men passing down to men and just men in general. Or two, and this is a very fucked up take, but Howard technically created this version of Wallace. So in a very fucked up way, Howard is his father. He helped create this new version of Wallace. So you can look at this walruses never cry as a father talking to his son and saying, son, life is hard. And sometimes it is not fair. Sometimes you come onto a trip for your podcast and you just You just dealt the wrong hand and you get turned into a walrus. But to keep it serious, like, life is hard. It's not fair. You're going to go through some hard shit. And as a man, you are supposed to take that shit on the chin. You're supposed to take life, put it on your shoulders, and not let anybody know that it is affecting you in the slightest. Yes, life sucks. But at the end of the day, as a man, you are not meant to show that it affects you whatsoever. It is our role to be a rock. We are not meant to show emotion. Men do not cry. And I think when you look at that scene in that way, all of a sudden this movie takes a new, like, you can look at this movie in a completely different way, which is how I've always looked at this film, and I don't think people give it credit for this. As a almost 37-year-old man, I remember growing up as a boy, and, like, not that I, like, ever had, like, serious conversations with my dad where he's like, "This is how men are supposed to be." It's just drilled into your head through media and sports and, watching wrestling and just, like, just in society and in the world in general, especially when I was growing up in the 90s, it's, man, if you showed any kind of, you know, empathy or sadness, which is, again, calling back to the sadness and Wallace's lack of empathy and things, if you showed any sort of empathy or sadness, what are you, a girl? Stop being a pussy. That's just drilled into you in school, just, going 5 days a week, it just drilled into you as a young boy. I don't want anybody to think I'm a girl or I'm a pussy. So you just kinda learn to, any sort of feelings you have, you just shove that shit so far down, and you just power your way through the day, the week, the month, the year. You just power through life. As a man, you're just expected to just take the hits that life swings at you, and you're just supposed to make it through. As an adult, men don't go to therapy. I don't view that way now, but before I threw myself into therapy post-divorce, like, no, I'm not supposed to go to therapy. Therapy is showing weakness. Going to therapy shows that I can't handle this, I can't handle life without help. And as a man, that's not what I'm supposed to do. If I go to therapy, I'm showing that I'm weak and I need help. And so maybe viewing this movie from that perspective as a man, maybe it just hits me harder, but I feel like both men and women can view this movie from an emotional standpoint, just based on, like, if you're straight, if you're a straight woman, you have involved yourself in some sort of relationship at some point, probably with a man, and I guarantee you that man has gone through this shit. I guarantee you have gone through it. I wish he would open up more. He has no empathy, or his emotional intelligence needs work, and, like, what the fuck? I just want him to open up to me. I wish he had feelings. Like, that's that's the core basis, I think, of Tusk. And looking at Howard yelling at Wallace in this, like, father-son dynamic, I think is just, like, you just dig a little bit deeper, and I don't think it's crazy for me to say that that exists within this film. So then the second that you view this movie from that lens, I think it just takes on a whole new perspective. So then you kinda roll into Wallace is now this fucking walrus, and Howard's doing this, and they even have this, like, like, I'm gonna put on this walrus suit, and, like, we're gonna fight as 2 male walruses. You kinda dive into that too, like, man versus man, who's more powerful? Who's gonna come out on top? And that you go into that. Generational, every older generation, I think, thinks that they are better than the younger one. Let's prove it. Father is always gonna have power over a son. Prove to me as my son that you are worthy of taking over this family, that you are worthy of carrying on this family's last name. You need to prove to me that you are gonna be a fucking man. Fight me in a walrus suit, which makes it absurd. But, like, when you start looking at these things like that, it takes on a whole new view. But then you go into kinda like the end of this movie where it wraps everything up, and we have this conversation. Well, no. Wallace ends up, you know, killing Howard. So, younger generation wins, son wins, whatever. He proved that he was top walrus, right? And he ends up in this zoo, which people just go, "Oh my god, like, can't he just be removed from the suit or whatever?" Like, he says that it's a walrus suit, but I'm like, I'm very fucking sure that was part of, like, the whole surgery was, like, Howard had to, like, change Wallace's body in a way to, like, kinda so I don't think that he can just, like, take the suit off. It's been a while since I've seen the movie in full, so, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's "Let's just cut the suit off and just, like, take him out." So, like, and again, it just leans into, like, the black comedy vibes of this film. Of course, Wallace is gonna end up isolated in this exhibit at the fucking zoo. But Allie and Tommy show up, and this is where everything kinda, like, comes full circle. And Allie's trying to get Wallace's attention, she's yelling for him, but he won't come out of his, like, little fucking hut. And so she opens up, Tommy tells her to, give him a fucking treat. And so she brings this big mackerel fish and she throws it down, and that gets Wallace to come out. He's just chomping. He's just eating his life away. And we have this moment where Allie is going through all these different emotions. And like, she's looking at the person that she was in love with, that she once fell in love with, and he's in this, like, state, he's gone through all this trauma, and she really cannot see the person that she once loved, but she knows he's there, and this layered thing, like, she knows that Wallace is in there, Wallace is in this suit, but, like, the old Wallace she's always believed the old one that she fell in love with is still there, and she's just trying to get that Wallace to see her one last time before she leaves, and she yells his name, "Wallace!" And he stops eating, and Wallace looks up, and they lock eyes. And it's in this moment that you finally see it, in Wallace's eyes through, albeit again in this absurd walrus form. But when he locks eyes with her, it's the first time that he's seen her since all of this shit has happened. And he locks eyes, and you can see him finally able to like assess and be able to process the situation and everything that he just went through. And he has this flashback, or like, and then we get this flashback between Allie and Wallace. And again, she's going into this whole thing about how, like, you used to be this, the old you used to just be so much more empathetic, and you felt things and you cried, and you used to watch Winnie the Pooh and you'd cry. And it was basically like the same conversation that we saw earlier, but there's an additional thing. And Hallie was talking about her family and how she was once told, like, it's okay to cry. It's okay. It's okay to feel. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to cry. It's what separates us from the animals. And again, it just kind of goes into this whole, like, that used to be you, but you've lost that. We flash forward back at the zoo, and there's Wallace he's still locked eyes with Hallie. And I don't know if you can tell, but like, I genuinely feel like, I've made comments about this before, like, I genuinely feel like this ending is so fucking devastating. And this is why. Hallie takes a moment and she looks at Wallace, and she's finally able to say, I love you, Wallace. Never forget that. And she's looking at what used to be this man that she was madly in love with. And just one last time, she's going to look this man in the eyes and say, I love you. All the shit that you've, that you've, that you have put me through and things, I know that person is inside, and I know he is still there. I'm telling that person, I love you, and I always will. And it's in that moment that Wallace is finally able to, like I said, assess the situation, think about all of what he's gone through, the trauma, where he's at. He's in a fucking zoo. He's a walrus. And he's able to start processing and think and look at her and say, my life is never going to be the same. And start thinking about the things that he's lost and how life is from here. This is his life now, and what he used to have. And he's able to see that in Allie, and it's at this moment that he's able to have an emotional moment with Allie. And as she's walking away, he cries. I think you can see a single tear in frame, but you can see a second one roll off of his other fucking tusk. And he cries. He's finally able to have a vulnerable, emotional moment with this woman that used to be his girlfriend. And as she's walking away, he crawls back into his little hut. And what's devastating about that is that vulnerable, emotional moment, Wallace feeling and being able to feel empathy and look at the situation and feel and cry. That is all Allie ever wanted from Wallace. The entire time. The entire time. And it took this man flying to Canada, being turned into a fucking walrus, and being stuck in a zoo to live in isolation seemingly the rest of his life. It took that for this man to express emotion and feeling. And I think at its core and at baseline, men can relate to that. Men can look at the situation that Wallace went through and they can relate. It takes mountains. It took me being turned into a walrus, which is insane to say, but it took that extreme of a thing to get me to break down and feel. I've carried the weight of my world, I've carried the weight of the world. I've gone through all these things, but it took this massive, extraordinary circumstances to make me feel, and it shouldn't. And women should be able to, like, any woman that has been in a relationship with a man should be able to, at the end of this movie, Kev, yep, been there, done that. So this film that gets so much shit for just being a stupid, unserious, absurd, what the fuck did I just watch? I can't believe you like this. Like, just a film that is taken so unseriously. In my opinion, when you peel back all the layers of this film, it actually has a lot of emotional, real things to say. And again, I'm not saying that it's like this highly developed, highly emotional, thought-provoking, things, like this thought-provoking film. I'm not saying that, but just like, I just feel like Tusk does not get the respect or credit that it deserves just because of the vehicle that Kevin Smith chose to, like, say these things through. And maybe I am so far off base that Kevin Smith, if you're listening and he's like, brother, you put things into this film that I wasn't even thinking of, what the fuck? No, this is just an absurd body horror film. I wanted to turn Justin Long into a fucking walrus. But I don't think that's the case. I genuinely do not. And so that is why I will forever stand on the hill, even if I'm by myself, which I know I'm not. One of my great friends, best friends, Brandon, he is right there with me, and he will defend this movie until the end of time. I know Chuck really loves Tusk. I know I'm not alone. There are lovers of Tusk, but I don't know that if people necessarily view the film the way that I view it. So I figured I would just take an entire episode because I don't feel like my video yesterday, got enough attention. And I feel like people just need to hear this. And even if you do not go rewatch Tusk, or if you've never seen Tusk, hopefully maybe this gives you like the push that you need to at least go give it a watch. And obviously, I didn't spoil or go through the entire film. But just the key points to kind of show like the emotional foundation that is in this film, or at least how I view it. I would love to know your experience with Tusk. Do you hate this film? Do you love this film? Um, did you have any, like, similar viewpoints of the film, or is it just a silly, absurd body horror movie that you either love or hate? Would love to know. Please let me know in the comments or send me a DM on Instagram or whatever. Would love to fucking know. Anyway, I love Tusk. I will defend that movie until the day I fucking die. And the fact that I got to meet Justin Long back at Fantastic Fest last year, and I took the opportunity, I swear to God, I took the maybe 30 seconds that I had, the split second that I had to get this man's attention, and I said, fuck it. I said, Justin. He turned to me. He looked me square in my eyes, and I said, I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but Tusk is an absolute fucking masterpiece. And he had this biggest smirk and smile on his face, and he goes, dude, thank you. I really appreciate that. Wow. And I said, no, I'm being dead fucking serious. I just, I think it's an incredible film. It has a lot to say. Where is Moose Jaws? I need the sequel. And he's like, oh my God, like I was just actually talking to, to Kevin about this through text last week or whatever. So I will relay this information to Kevin. And I said, please do. And he said, will do. Have a great day. It was like a really fast interaction. And I turned around to Chuck and everybody else and I said, you hear that? If there is a sequel to Tusk, guess who's responsible? You're welcome. So, if that's going to be my claim to fame, that I pushed Justin Long and Kevin Smith to do a Tusk 2, I'll take it. I'll fucking take it. Anyway, I'm going to leave you guys with that. Again, would love to know your thoughts on the movie. Am I insane? Am I a psycho? Do I need to be committed? Should I bring this up in therapy next time I see her? Maybe. Anyway, um, talking to myself, Justin, I hope you're having a great time at South by Southwest. I hope it's everything that you wanted it to be. And everybody listening to this right now, again, thank you so much for the constant support. If you have not followed me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, please do so. That would be great. I post pretty much not on YouTube, but I post on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook every single fucking day, brother. So if you love horror content and you haven't followed me on there, do that, please. And if you have yet to rate the podcast with a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on, that would be greatly appreciated. It just helps me get the podcast through the algorithm so we can reach more people. Thank you. I appreciate that as well. I will be back. Hopefully, I get back on the 19th, and my plan is to get a massive amount of sleep, wake up, and record a podcast to have out for that Friday. If not Friday, 100% Saturday. So Friday or Saturday, next week, I will have a podcast out. I will not leave you hanging. So until then, I hope you guys have a great days, great week. I will talk to you soon. And until then, remember, watch something spooky this week.